Okay, and welcome to Thursdays with Charlie. This is our seventh show. I can't believe how they've gone on, and it's the 18th of June, 2020, and it's an awesome day here in a very, very warm paradise. We got some excellent news in Laughlin this week. You've probably heard it already that we're going to get a food store. We're going to get the market. It's going to open in the location of the old Aldapi's Marketplace. Should be open by the end of the summer. The market, as far as I can learn, is a chain coming in from Colorado. And hopefully they'll be bringing some wonderful stuff and great convenience to us to be able to shop locally here in Laughlin. My big concern is I do hope they're going to have a nice variety of bacon when they open, and I'll be looking forward to that. But nice news for us that a food store is coming, and that will be great. Please remember, we're probably going to have to use this reservation system for weekend masses for a few more weeks. So please, you need to call in on Thursday or Friday between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. The number here at the church is 702-298-0440. And you need to speak with a real person. Don't leave a message. And you can reserve up to 3 seats for the masses. So far, the 4 p.m. and the 8 a.m. fill up the first. Those are usually full by the end of Thursday, actually. But we have had room even on the weekend for 6 p.m. and for 10 a.m. and for 12 noon. So those are the easier masses to get reservations for. Please keep that in mind, and we'll probably have to use this reservation system for a few more weeks. We are not full at our weekday masses, nor do we need reservations for them. So on Monday, Tuesday, and Friday, we have Mass at 8 a.m. at the church, and first 50 people get in, and we've so far had under 25 for each of the masses. So it's been really easy to get in. You must wear a mask. We do take your temperature, but then you come on in, and it's almost like normal except for having the masks and the smell of disinfectant and things like that. We're looking forward to that very much. Tomorrow, by the way, is the Feast of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, so perhaps a few more people will be out for our 8 a.m. Mass to celebrate the Sacred Heart, the wonderful mercy and kindness of God shown through the heart of His Son. So we're very grateful to be able to celebrate that. If you get a chance to drive by the church, we have some beautiful news on our Garces Center. The walls are going up, and you can actually see very clearly the outline of the building and the size and scope of it. Also, there's been some great videos. You'll see them on our Facebook page and also on our website of the construction. But if you drive by, you'll get a really good view of it. I'm getting a personal tour tomorrow in the morning, getting to walk through the building, so I'll be able to physically see all the spaces and how it looks with the outer walls almost completely up. So we're very grateful for the progress, and even during the virus, we're able to get that building up, and that is a good thing. Tonight, Thursday, my friend Ben Seidman is doing a video show, a Zoom show. It's at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time, and it's called Atlas Obscura Camera Tricks. Atlas Obscura Camera Tricks. What he's doing is he's having people sign up for the show. It's a $25 ticket fee, and you get to see him perform, and you get to see some of the wonderful camera tricks and magic that can be done. I mention this because I'm going to be watching it, and I'm part of the advertisement for that show. You might remember a few weeks ago when I mentioned they had to do a video of me with my mouth wide open in sheer surprise, and then get a release sign for them to use the video. So I'm actually a part of that show, and it's kind of nice, and I'm looking forward to seeing it very much. Someday I hope we'll have Ben here in the parish doing a show for us live in our new building, and I look forward to that coming up. Another good event I got connected with is a friend of mine, Paul LaGreca, wrote a book last year, and it's called The Boy Behind the China Closet. It's a story of growing up in northern New Jersey and all the things that went on in his life. And last year, when he finished his manuscript, he asked me if I would mind reading the manuscript because I knew a lot of the places and a lot of the people who are mentioned in the book. And so I did. And then he asked me would I comment on it. So I did. And a few weeks ago, he called to tell me that the book has gone into production and that my comment is one of them, is used on the cover of his book. Well, of course, that excited me. It's kind of nice to know that something I said is going to be on the cover of a book. And so the actual comment is, this is a powerful, valuable, engaging, and important story of a struggle, but also of a search. And both are critical efforts in our world today. So I was very happy to see that and hear about it. Then about a week later, Paul calls me and says, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And I figured he's going to tell me that the comment was taken off the cover. No, it wasn't. The comment is still there. But unfortunately, in the haste of production, they misspelled my name. And so the comment is credited to Charles U-R-N-I-K. They left out the C for my name. So it's still there, and I kind of like it. So I'm looking forward to it. The book coming out later this month, actually, The Boy Behind the China Closet. Over there. Moving on over here, I've been reading a lot and hearing a lot about the destruction of our history and our statues. I even preached about it last week. And I happened to see on Facebook, a friend of mine posted an old picture of George Orwell, the author of Animal Farm, the author of 1984. And the picture of George Orwell was there, and I figured, well, he's obviously making a reference to 1984 or Animal Farm. And the picture is framed with the words, it's a quote supposedly from George Orwell now. I wrote 1984 as a warning, not as an instruction book. I think we could all take that and say what's going on in the world today. A lot of the things that science fiction writers talked about in utopian or dystopian societies is now seemingly coming true. So George Orwell, if you see the meme, it's kind of a nice one. You might remember back in the 1960s and 70s, so much upheaval, not only in the world, but so much upheaval in the church. Everything seemed to be changing, and it seemed to be changing really, really fast. Every week you'd come to Mass and you wouldn't know what would be different because something would be in Latin and the following week it would be in English. Something would not be in the Mass at all and next week it would be there. Even the clothing that people wore was changing. Nuns' habits in the 70s began to kind of disappear and they began wearing regular street clothes. My famous story about that time is a friend of mine, Father Frank Burns, was a teacher at Seton Hall University. He was one of my teachers and a really good friend. And Frank supposedly, had, well, not supposedly, really, just had a very outgoing sense, and he would say what he was thinking very, very readily. And this one young nun put on her new habit, which was short, with a little veil in the back of her head, and she goes up to him before Sunday Mass, and she kind of flings her hair up in the air, and she says, Father Byrne, I bet you didn't know I had red hair." And the story goes that Father Byrne looked her up and down and said, "Didn't know you had varicose veins either, sister," and went on with his day. Things were changing. It was really an interesting and perhaps somewhat exciting period over there. Everything, vestments, setups of churches. It's when we began seeing churches in the round in a lot of places. But a lot of things were being thrown out, kind of like what we're seeing with some history today. The church was actually literally throwing out some old things they thought would never be used again. And I was upset by that. In the 60s, I was still in high school, and in the 70s going into college and the ordination at the seminary. And I said I really should do something about it. And I was a writer even back then. And so I wrote a letter to the local Catholic paper saying, I was planning to study for the priesthood, and I really did not like the idea of all these bits of church history being thrown out. And that if anybody reads this letter and you would like to save them, I would be glad to take them and take care of them. Well, the letter was written in our local Catholic paper in New Jersey, but somehow it got picked up and it went the equivalent of viral in the late 1960s and began circulating to papers, Catholic papers around the United States. And so I began receiving things because people felt, well, we wouldn't throw them out, but we can give them away. I was at home, I used my home address, and it was not unusual for UPS to come by with maybe 10 or 15 boxes a day for a couple of weeks there as the letters circulated. I received, over the course of a few months, hundreds of boxes. And some of them contained missals that were no longer going to be used. Some of them contained pictures. Some of them contained things from the churches or vestments that would not be used anymore. I received several sets of black mass vestments because black, they figured, would never be used again. It used to be used all the time for funeral masses. And so I received several beautiful sets that people did not want to see thrown out. And along with them, I received a lot of letters from people saying, I'm glad that this is going to be preserved somewhere. It's part of our history. Oh, I can understand why we may not be using it now, but we shouldn't forget that we did use it and why we used it and what it meant to the people who used it over there. And so I was really very glad to be getting all of that stuff. And I received, like I said, hundreds of boxes of stuff, and I still have it. Among the many boxes in my house are boxes that I brought from New Jersey. And I kept them over there. One of the things I received, I brought in to show. You might remember, if you were an altar server, this was an altar card. And there were two of these on the altar. The tabernacle would be in the middle of the altar, and there'd be one of the cards on one side and one on the other. The card on one side represented some prayers. This card is the one from the right side of the altar, and it's the beginning of the Holy Gospel of St. John in Latin. Those of you who remember back into their going to Mass, at the end of every Mass after communion, the priest would read the first 12 verses of the first chapter of St. John. It was at that time read in Latin, which is what the card is in. And I received several sets of these altar cards reminding us of the reading of that gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And it goes on for 12 verses. You might also remember back then we had things like High Mass and Low Mass. The idea of High Mass, everything was sung. And Low Mass, everything was recited. I mention everything because there weren't options. You said everything that was there. There was, and if you look at a video of the old Mass, there were over 50 signs of the cross where the priest would bless himself or bless an item in the old Mass, whether it were high or low Mass. Back in those days, back in the early 60s, late 50s even, I always knew that I wanted to become a priest, but I never wanted to become an altar boy, because I figured that for the rest of my life, I'm going to be getting up early for Mass, and why should I do it when I was in school or grade school or high school? And so I didn't want to become an altar boy, but I did want to become a priest. And so I hung around a lot with the priests of our day, and I was lucky. They were really good priests. They were very caring and very useful and very good in the community. But what I remember most is how I learned some things about priesthood. Is I would ask one of the priests in my parish something, and the usual answer was, "Get in the car and I'll show you." I can't really see that happening today, but it really was a great way of learning. I asked, well, what do you do when you visit someone's home, visit someone who's sick? And I can remember Father O'Connor, Charlie O'Connor, saying, if you get in the car, and we drove to a house in Rivervale, New Jersey, and we visited a bedridden patient whom he had been visiting for years. And things like that would happen. And I got used to it, and I got to enjoy it. And I said, this could be a way of life that I would enjoy very, very much. So always remember that line, well, get in the car, and I'll show you. Some of the other things from those days, I'm not sure if this was only in the Northeast, but at churches in those days, there used to be little tables set up at the front door of the church, and you would have to put in 10 cents or 15 cents or a quarter, and it was called seat money to go into the church. And the ushers would count up the change in little tubes, and I don't know if that was done countrywide or that was just something in the Northeast, but seat money was something back then. The last gospel I already showed you. We had May processions and May crownings, and we had a lot of novenas. Almost any day of the week, you could go to the church and there would be a novena. Remember, back in those days, Mass was in Latin, but the novena wasn't Mass. So the novena, the prayers, the hymns would all be in English or whatever the native language of the place was. And so people flocked to novenas, and they would be crowded, maybe hundreds of people on a Monday night because there were special novenas for that, or a Tuesday, or a Wednesday, or a Thursday, or a Friday. And they kept people active in the church. Perhaps one of the most famous novenas were the novena to Mother of Perpetual Help, or Our Lady of Perpetual Help. And my parents, before I was born, sometime during 1947, went to Queen of Peace Church in North Arlington. That was their parish church. And they attended a novena to Our Lady of Perpetual Help. And they bought an image over there and brought it home. It's hanging up at my house. I have to mention that people sometimes ask me, well, would you like to have a picture or a crucifix or something? I have only 2 religious items in my entire house. I know that sounds strange, but they're 2 that are there because they mean a lot to me to be in my house. One is that picture of Our Lady of Perpetual Help, and the other is a crucifix from my friend Charlie O'Connor. He was a priest for over 50 years before he died, and he spoke at my first Mass, and I spoke at his 50th anniversary. I was even able to speak at his funeral. But he had a crucifix that he had hanging in his room for as long as I can remember. And when he died, that was the one possession of his that I really wanted. And so I have Our Lady of Perpetual Help, and I have the crucifix from Father Charlie O'Connor as my religious decorations. Should be about time for us to see our owl, and since we're talking about, there he is. And looking good, I might add. What has he got in his beak for us today? Let's see. People often talk about how the Latin Mass was daunting, or they didn't understand it, and yet people seem to know an awful lot about it and be able to participate. And this is one of the lines that people very frequently say they remember from the Latin Mass. Kyrie Eleison. Kyrie Eleison. I should mention that one of the odd things about that in the Latin Mass is that it's not Latin. It's the only words in the Latin Mass that are not Latin. They're Greek. And there was an ancient part of the Mass that was kept in Greek even when the whole world was doing Mass in Latin. And it means, Lord, have mercy. Kyrie eleison. And then if you hear us singing it, as we do sometimes at church, we sing Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy, and then we'll sing Christe eleison, Christ have mercy, and repeat them each 3 times for fullness over there. But the most famous things that people remember from the Latin Mass, Kyrie eleison, is actually Greek, not Latin. The one I get questioned about, because we still sing it in Latin, is the Agnus Dei. Agnus Dei qui tollis peccata mundi. Lamb of God, Agnus Dei qui tollis peccata mundi, who take away the sins of the world. Miserere nobis, have mercy on us. We sing that in Latin, and I hope that we continue to sing that in Latin to remind us a bit of our past. At one point, the whole Mass was in Latin except for the little Greek Kyrie, Eleison, and we participated. That was our level of participation at the time. We used our missals. We were sometimes glued to them. But now Mass is in English, but I think we should never forget our roots in the past. And so singing the Agnus Dei is kind of a beautiful way to do that. Lamb of God, who take away the sins of the world, have mercy on us. For me, I think the most famous lines in the Mass that I remember, and all of you who were altar boys back then, we didn't have altar girls, but if you were an altar boy back in the 40s or 50s or 60s, you'd remember it. Every Mass began by the priest making the sign of the cross, and then the words, Intruibo ad altare Dei. And the altar server would respond in the name of all the people, Ad Deum qui litificat juventutem meum. Intruibo ad altare Dei, I will go into the altar of God. Ad Deum qui litificat juventutem meum, to God who gives joy to my youth. And we began every Mass that way. Now, I mentioned that I didn't want to become an altar boy. Well, in high school, I succumbed. And I said, well, I guess if I'm going to be a priest, I should be an altar boy. And so I went to study as a high school student the Latin to become an altar boy. Now, very early on in my career, before I had even served Mass at all, we got a new young priest in our parish, Father Charlie Hudson. And Charlie Hudson was brand new at being a priest. And I was brand new at being an altar boy. And one of the ways you learn to be an altar boy is you have to learn when your line comes in. You had several responses you had to make at Mass. And so I would memorize the priest's part so that I would know when I had to say my part. Charlie Hudson, who was newly ordained as a priest, had just been learning the priest's part, but he knew the altar server's part because that's how he'd been doing. And we had one Mass, which is still remembered at Our Lady of Mercy in Park Ridge, New Jersey, where I was the server and Father Charlie Hudson was the priest. And we began Mass, we blessed ourselves and then began with the Intruibo ad altare Dei, and there was a list of 5 lines, responses. The priest would say something, the altar server would respond. And we went through it, and before we got to the end of it, we had mixed up the parts. I was saying the priest's part, and Charlie Hudson was answering me. We got it? He said, no, start again. So we started again. It took us 5 times before we got through the opening of Mass, beginning with the Intruibo ad altare Dei. I still remember that day with Charlie Hudson. We began Mass 5 times till we got it over. There are so many things about the early Mass that I remember, and it's so beautiful. Maybe one of the ones you remember is the priest would turn around, because he was facing the altar, not the people. He would turn around periodically during the Mass and extend his hands, and he would say, Dominus vobiscum, the Lord be with you. And you would answer, the people would respond, Et cum spiritu tuo. In fact, that was a joke back in the day. What is the phone number of the Holy Ghost? Et cum spiritu tuo. But in the Latin, it was our response. It's where when priests would wish us peace several times during the Mass, and we would respond. So we were participating, and I think it's good to remember a few of these things. Sometime if you ever get a chance and you have internet access, go on the internet and look up a video of the old Latin Mass and just watch it. You'll find that you kind of can follow along very easily with where things are and what they're doing. And you get to the end of it and you kind of think, that was really nice. I'm glad we came out of that. But I think you'll also think, I'm really glad where we are now, where we can respond in English and we understand a little bit more about where and when things are happening. So keep that in mind. Hang on to history. It's important to us. We do learn from it, and we grow because of it. And I think we might as well end the show with that beautiful greeting. So the priest would say, Dominus vobiscum. That's my wish for you. The Lord be with you today and always. God bless.